In this series, I've focused wildly on artists, people who are bringing artistically relevant material to the genre, new voices to inform a generation still to come. This installment is a little bit different, and that's not meant to degrade the artist in question at all, because he is an artist. However, there's always been those whose primary goal is to entertain rather than have an artistically pure experience. So for every David Lynch that the horror genre is lucky enough to have, we have a Roger Corman. And a Roger Corman can inspire not just great films, but entire generations of filmmakers. So we should be careful not to talk down an entertainer. Indonesia is a hot spot in the world today for horror. It has a thriving horror scene that really is pretty much unmatched anywhere else in the world. Even hotspots we've talked about, like India or Turkey, can't really compare to the sheer number of films that are coming out and the popularity of genre films in this country. Indonesia is interesting culturally too because it's very Western for a Asian country, but it enjoys a strong Muslim tradition. That's an interesting mix to Westernize to begin with, so already we have fairly exotic looking films. Oh, and by the way, their architecture and their landscapes are breathtaking. It's an incredibly beautiful country, so there's some automatic production value just by setting a film in their home country. Rocky Soraya is very much the Roger Corman of India. He has set up his own studio. He has managed to get international distribution, including through Netflix in America for most of his work. He enjoys outrageous amounts of control that are rare anywhere in the world. That he chooses popular American films as his template isn't so different than what Roger Corman did either. Roger Corman wasn't above leeching off of more popular films for his more modestly budgeted productions, and Soraya is no different. Now, in today's world, you're not going to be inspired by the Hammer horror films. You're going to find inspiration in things like the Conjuring universe, the Insidious movies, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. The template for his most popular franchise, The Doll, is transparently the Annabelle films. Here's what drew me to him as an artist, and more importantly again, as an entertainer. His films follow the story beats of an Annabelle film pretty closely. In fact, you could almost create a drinking game in the comparison. But here's where I deviate from a lot of the reviews you're going to read online. I love what he's done, because what he's done is a lot more pure and honest. You can feel its exploitation roots. It's not trying to be some grandiose mainstream entertainment. He's trying to make little exploitation movies. And these little exploitation films look gorgeous. There is really great production. Now, the thing that gets him into this series, though, isn't just that he makes, homages to popular American films, just having to do them in another country. No, that wouldn't be enough. I wouldn't champion that. What I champion is his three-act structure. The first two acts are pretty much exactly like you'd expect. They are really an analog to the first three acts of an American horror film. It's in his third acts that he really shines. Because you know how you always wanted an Annabelle film to end? You always wanted the bloodbath, the absolute carnage to pay off all that buildup. That never really comes in any of those Conjuring movies. Oh, Rocky Soraya knows what you want, and he delivers it. These films get incredibly violent, incredibly gory, and most importantly, they have stakes. The characters that manage to survive one of his films walk away looking like they should look, having gone through this ordeal. No one looks pretty, and no one isn't covered in bruises, cuts, scrapes, blood, both their own and others. And they don't walk away morally pure either. Another thing that these films do very well is they take regular everyday sins and regular everyday evils and look at them through the eyes of the supernatural. So a robbery gone wrong may cost you your family in the most horrific way possible. These mystery structures that use flashbacks at the end of the film to point out all the small hints that have been present throughout the whole film are really well done. And even though by the third film in this series you pretty much understand that you're going to get that sequence, it's still fascinating to see how he pulls it all together. He makes the people, the quote-unquote victims, complicit. And although formulaic by itself, it's his formula overlaid over the plot structure of those of popular American films. The Doll series has at this point 3 films, with a 4th in production. The titles are The Doll 2, and Sabrina. The new film is reportedly coming out under the title The Doll 3, which is a little bit confusing since Sabrina is a direct sequel to Doll 2. But maybe he has a plan that we're not aware of. His other big franchise is the Third Eye films, which are more based on the Pang brothers' Eye films, as well as The Sixth Sense. They're about a woman who can see ghosts. To say more might spoil some of the surprises in the film, but to be honest with you, most of the plot twists are pretty telegraphed. And you can tell he doesn't mean this to be a wine glass drop. We're not supposed to be utterly flabbergasted that I didn't see that coming. Instead, he takes those twists and makes them relevant to the plot. They're not just twists to shock us as an audience. They actually inform the story going forward and play a logical role. Now, in these films especially, you'll notice that he has a very literal view of the afterlife. It's very much like the Insidious movies in that it's a hard physical reality that's just a different physical reality than our own. And he presents it this way without any regard for traditional versions of heaven and hell from any particular religion. There's plenty of religious language in the film, but that doesn't mean that he subscribes to it visually. And while those sequences can sometimes look cheap, it doesn't really matter because the story is what matters at that point. And if things look a little bit like a commercial haunted house that you might walk through on Halloween, well, isn't that what we're really doing when we watch a movie? Aren't we going to a haunted house? The Third Eye was followed up by a sequel, and it's one of those sequels that is right on par with the original. If you didn't like the first, don't go on to the second because you won't enjoy it. But I feel that both films are pretty solid, if not quite up to the bar of the Doll series. He has another franchise above that, which in America is known as Susanna, Buried Alive, and its sequel. These films are a lot more bizarre, but they're kind of a cross-melding of both of his other franchises in tone and feel and subject matter. I haven't seen all of his films, so I won't go through a description of everything he's done, but it is impossible not to be filled with respect for a guy who's built an entire company, an entire career, on his obvious love for the horror genre. And for those who are worried that these are more derivative than the other artists that we talked about in this series, don't hang your hat too high on that, because he does bring a lot new in terms of visuals. And while he does feel the effects of the budgets that he has forced to work under, there are CGI bats in the first Doll film that look great whenever they're in the distance, but when they're close up they look strangely rubbery. It reminds me of Lucio Fulci's Spiders from the Beyond. Not a particularly good special effect by any rate, but it works for the story if you choose to buy into it. So if you're willing to be forgiving, these films are absolutely entertaining beyond most of what's produced by anyone else anywhere else. Most of Rocky Soraya's films are available on Netflix. Now, I've said this before, you're going to have to use the search feature to find them. So you're going to have to search by title. And then once you find one, you'll notice that it suggests more for you. But if you just try and go into their horror section and scroll through, you'll never find it. It will never come up. So start with the Doll and give the Doll a real chance. And hang with it. The first act you're going to feel is real familiar to you. It may feel like a cheaper knockoff of the Conjuring movies, but hang with it. You have to get to the third act. The third act will make or break whether you love this artist or not. I, for one, can't wait to finish up his discography and see whatever comes out next, which, since it's the Doll 3, is almost guaranteed to be something I'm going to enjoy. If you've seen any of his films, why don't you leave a comment below and let us all know how you feel. If you haven't, you have the time right now, right? You probably have Netflix. What are you waiting for?